What is the goal of teaching? And what is teaching anyway? Well, if the goal of teaching is to create learning in our students, then let's take a step back and ask, what is learning through the lens of neuroscience? The answer isn't just about what lessons or activities we're doing. It's about what's happening inside the brain. If neurons aren't firing and wiring together, then is learning even happening? In this video, we're diving into the neuroscience of learning, what it is, what happens in the brain when we learn, and what this means for math instruction. Welcome, I'm Becky Lord, your go-to guide on how we can align math instruction with neuroscience so that everyone can learn and love math. If that's what you'd like to learn more about, then hit subscribe because we're going to be sharing a lot more content to make our math teaching mathemagical. If you'd like to go deeper, check out our free resources at lordmath.com, as well as our online course, Decoding Math, and our new structured numeracy curriculum called Mathemagical. Ready to create math-confident kids? Let's get into it. As teachers, people who have chosen teaching as our profession and our life's work, a worthwhile question to reflect on is, what is the goal of teaching? And what is teaching anyway? Lately, when I provide professional development, particularly for school administrators, I start with this question as it sets the stage for all that is to follow. I believe the goal of teaching is to create learning in our students. If the goal is to create learning, well, what then is learning? There is a great phrase in neuroscience coined by psychologist Donald Hebb in 1949. Neurons that fire together, wire together. If we look at neuroscience, I define learning as the development of new neural pathways. To me, this also includes both the creation and then the strengthening of those new neural connections. I'm always happy and relieved when the conclusions I have come to about neuroscience align with those of experts in the field. In his brilliant book, Becoming Supernatural, Dr. Joe Dispenza writes, when your brain is in action, you are in fact turning on a specific sequence, pattern, and combination of neurological networks. Those neural networks are simply clusters of neurons that work together as a community, just like an automatic software program or a macro, because you've done that particular action so many times. In other words, the neurons that fire together to accomplish the task become more wired together. He states, learning from a neuroscientific standpoint is when neurons in your brain assemble to form thousands of synaptic connections, and those connections then assemble into complex, three-dimensional neurological networks. Think of learning as your brain getting an upgrade. When you pay attention to knowledge or information and it makes sense to you, this interaction with the environment leaves biological impressions in your brain. When you experience something new, your senses write the story neurologically in your brain, and even more neurons come together to make even more enriched connections, upgrading your brain even further. He goes on to say, experiences not only enhance the brain circuitry, but they also create emotions. Think of emotions as the chemical residue from past experiences, or chemical feedback. The stronger the emotional quotient from an event in your life, the more the experience leaves a lasting impression in your brain. That's how long-term memories are formed. So if learning means making new connections in your brain, memories are when you maintain those connections. The more you repeat a thought, choice, behavior, experience, or emotion, the more those neurons fire and wire together, and the more they will sustain a long-term relationship. If learning is the development of new neural pathways and the goal of teaching is learning, then what is teaching? I define teaching as the facilitation of learning, meaning any activities we facilitate that develop new neural pathways in our students. Interestingly, there is a line of thought in some parts of the math education world that certain skills can't be taught. I think that depends on how we define teaching, and as a teacher, I sure hope all skills can be taught. I appreciate how Douglas Clements addresses this line of thinking in his fantastic article, Supertizing, What is it? Why teach it? He states, supertizing is an important mathematics skill, but can supertizing be taught? Some might argue that it cannot, but that conclusion depends on what is meant by teach. Everybody Counts from the National Research Council in 1989 says, in reality, no one can teach mathematics. Effective teachers are those who can stimulate students to learn mathematics. Douglas Clements says, I agree only if we define teaching as mere telling, but I define teaching more broadly. Those who stimulate students to learn, by setting up experiences, by guiding investigations, and sometimes by telling, are teaching. Conceptual subitizing must be learned and therefore be fostered or taught in this broad sense. This definition requires we look at what activities qualify as teaching. If I talk and my students don't learn, as evidenced by the creation of new neural pathways, then did I teach? If I plan amazing activities, but my students don't demonstrate learning, then did I teach? I would say no. I may have done a lot of beautiful and hard work, but if the students are not learning, then it wasn't teaching. But what if I do all this hard work and half my students learn, but half don't? Then I've effectively taught one half, but not the other. My point here is not to dishearten us or criticize the hard work of teachers. Instead, it is to help us be very strategic and intentional that the work we choose to do is creating the outcomes we want. If you're doing a whole bunch of math activities that aren't creating much math learning in your students, then guess what? Take them off your plate. Let's replace them with activities that are highly effective at creating math learning. When I work with schools, there's often a sense that teachers are maxed out and we can't put any more on their plates, which I understand and empathize with. But what I generally see is that the methods we are using for teaching math, those that exist in many of today's math curriculum, are not particularly effective. Interestingly, when students aren't learning, schools often feel the pressure to do more. But for many students, more of what's not working will not suddenly work. And so instead of doing more, let's do different. Let's do instructional methods that are highly effective at creating new neural pathways and strengthening existing ones. Or, as I like to put it, let's align math instruction with neuroscience so that everyone can learn and love math. If you're curious to learn more and develop some new neural pathways about what effective instructional methods I recommend, then check out some of my blogs and resources on subitizing and groupitizing, using dot cards, manipulatives, dyscalculia, structured numeracy, explicit instruction, and more. Thank you so much for being here. If you're as excited as I am about transforming math education to be as effective as possible, hit subscribe below and check out our other resources at lordmath.com. I've got so much more mathemagical content coming your way. While you're at it, please share this video with anyone you know who may find it helpful. Let's work together to make math learning better for all. See you soon.